Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today we are going to be doing the next video in a little mini series that I'm doing, which is 5-star predictions. This one is going to be on non-fantasy books because that is predominantly what I read. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. The first book is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. I mean, I'm not going to read the blurb for this one because we all have heard of Don Quixote. It's influenced a lot of amazing works that have been written today or recently. And I just feel like it's a book that is very beloved and it's a must read for any reader. And I honestly can't believe I still haven't read it yet. I do actually have multiple editions of Don Quixote because I know I'm going to love it. And I do have an Eastern Press edition of it, which is absolutely stunning. But I'm very excited to read it. I think it's going to be one that I have to get to next year because it's a classic. How can you not read it? I have a very strong feeling I'm going to give it a 5 stars. The next book is a book called Deadwood by Pete Dexter. It is a Western. I have mentioned this before in one of my other videos that I do really like Westerns. I want to be reading more of them. I love Western movies. I love Red Dead Redemption. It's one of my favorite games. I love Western TV shows and I love reading Westerns. So it is a subgenre that I really enjoy. So without further ado, I'm going to read the blurb. Deadwood, Dakota Territories, 1876. Legendary gunman Wild Bill Hickok and his friend Charlie Utter have come to the Black Hills town of Deadwood fresh from Cheyenne, fleeing an ungrateful populace. Bill, aging and sick but still able to best any man in a fair gunfight, just wants to be left alone to drink and play cards. But in this town of played out miners, bounty hunters, upstairs girls, Chinese immigrants and various other entrepreneurs and miscreants, he finds himself pursued by a vicious sheriff, a perverse whoreman bent on revenge and a besotted Calamity Jane. Fueled by liquor, sex and violence, this is the real Wild West, unlike anything portrayed in the dime novels that first told its story. This just sounds amazing. There is a show based on this and I actually watched the first season and then I realized it was based on a book and I stopped watching the show, and then inevitably I never actually read the book. I bought it, but I just haven't picked it up yet. If the blurb of that doesn't make you want to read it, I don't know what is wrong with you. It just sounds amazing. It's going to be full of morally grey characters. It's going to be full of a lot of action, familiar names that we know from the Western world. And I'm so excited to read it. And I have a very, very, very strong feeling it's going to be a 5 stars. The next book is a book by an author that I really like. And I've mentioned him before on my channel, and that is Cormac McCarthy. The book is Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian is supposed to be very unforgiving as a book. It's very dark. Takes darkness to another level from what I understand. I'm very anxious but very excited to read it. I'm going to read the blurb. Blood Meridian is an epic novel of the violence and depravity that attended America's westward expansion, brilliantly subverting the conventions of the Western novel and the mythology of the Wild West. Based on historical events that took place on the Texas-Mexico border in the 1850s, it traces the fortunes of the kid, a 14-year-old Tennessean who stumbles into a nightmarish world where Indians are murdered and the market for their scalps is thriving. Another book that you'll see a common theme here. There's a couple of Westerns here, and the Westerns that I have read, and I will do a video on this soon, I've loved and I've generally given 4 stars or above. Cormac McCarthy, I love the way he writes. I love the world that he creates. It's very brutal, it's very grim, and it's not for everyone. But this is a book I know I'm going to love, and I think I'm going to read it with Ina and Angela at some point next year, which I'm very excited for. The next one is also a classic, and I mentioned that my brother really enjoyed this book and I can't believe I still haven't read it, and that is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I'm not going to read the blurb for this one because everybody knows A Tale of Two Cities. I've heard the ending is phenomenal. I just have a feeling that once I maybe get over that initial hump, because I did actually start reading this, I think it was last year, and I don't think I was in the right frame of mind for it. Once I get over that initial kind of adjustment of having to read Dickens, because Dickens' style for me, it just takes me a couple of chapters for me to get into it. Once I get over that, I'll be fully in his world, and I'm very excited to read it because it's a classic and it's almost criminal that I haven't read it yet. The next one is another Western. There's quite a lot of Westerns on this list. I didn't actually realise that until now. And that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. So Lonesome Dove influenced Red Country by Joe Abercrombie. And as you all know, Joe Abercrombie is my favourite author. I love the sound of this book, which I'm going to read now. A triumphant portrayal of the American West as it really was. Set in the 1880s, Lonesome Dove is the story of a cattle drive, an epic journey from the Rio Grande to the highlands of Montana that will try men's souls as they attempt to carve out a new life in the last remaining wilderness. Augustus McCrae and W.F. Call are former Texas Rangers, retired and becalmed after long years of putting down the Comanches. Gus is the romantic, a reluctant ranger who fills his days with whiskey and the sound of his own voice reminiscing about the old days. Cole is devoted to hard work and silence, driven, demanding, and obsessed with the dream of creating his own empire. Larry McMurtry's intensely powerful novel brings alive as never before this most enduring of American myths, the frontier, recreated in a magnificent story of heroism, love, honor, loyalty, and betrayal. Ah, that just sounds amazing. Reading it makes me want to pick it up now, but I'm reading something else at the moment. It just sounds so good. I'm so excited to read it. And it is a behemoth of a book, but you know, needs must. And I feel like this is going to be an epic story. I have a feeling that this is going to be one of these books that is going to impact me in many ways, and I'm very excited. It's going to be covering a lot of topics that I'm personally very interested in. You know, I've mentioned this before, but I love books that are about people just trying to live their lives and trying to get through the next day. So this is a book I know I'm gonna love, and I'll be very surprised if I don't give it 5 stars. All right, we've got 2 left. The next one I'm gonna do quickly because this book needs no introduction and I'm not gonna read the blurb, and that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So my plan is to read all the Jane Austen books in publication order. I read Sense and Sensibility a couple of months back and I loved it. And so Pride and Prejudice is next on the list. And I read Pride and Prejudice when I was younger at school, and as always, school completely destroys your ability to enjoy any book unless you're very lucky. I remember parts of it, but I remember it more as the experience of reading it when I was a child in school and not enjoying that experience. So I'm very excited to pick it up as an adult. I think it's going to be a 5-star because it's Pride and Prejudice, and Jane Austen is a phenomenal writer. The final book on this list is a little bit different. It is a book by Michael Chabon, and it is called Cavalier and Clay, or The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Weirdly, a couple of years back, I had this really deep interest in Nazi Germany. I read a lot about it. I read a lot of non-fiction about it. I was listening to a lot of podcasts about it. I don't know what triggered it. I just became really interested in that period of history. I studied it a lot at school. I don't like the way that you're taught anything at school. And so I kind of went through this rediscovery of learning about Nazi rule and the impact of that globally. As a result of that, I started doing research into novels that were not necessarily set in Germany, but had an element of the impact of Nazi Germany on the world. So I ended up watching The Man in the High Castle, which is a TV show based on the book by Philip K. Dick of the same name, which is a book I'd really like to read, and the show is phenomenal. The first 2 seasons in particular, I didn't really like the last season. I think it was only 3 seasons, but the first 2 seasons were amazing and I strongly recommend it. And after I finished watching that, I just went into this binge of like finding books and reading books set with a similar premise, which is what would have happened if the Nazis had won. Absolutely terrifying concept. The world would be very different to what it is today. It's a very interesting thing to kind of grapple with, I think. This book, The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, is a slight kind of take on that. So let me just read the blurb. One night in 1939, Joseph Cavalier shuffles into his cousin Sam Clay's cramped New York bedroom, his arduous, nerve-wracking escape from Prague finally achieved. So begins the friendship and partnership that will create The Escapist, a comic strip about a Nazi-busting savior who liberates the oppressed around the world. It makes their fortune and their name, but Joe can think of only one thing. How can he effect a real-life escape for his family from the tyranny of Hitler? I've heard it's absolutely phenomenal, this book. It's one that I have a very strong feeling that I'm going to really enjoy because it's grappling with a period of history that is so dark and is humanity at its worst. But apparently there's also comedic elements to it. It's got quite a dry humor to it as well. So I'm very excited to read it, and I'll be very surprised if I don't give it 5 stars. There we have it, folks. Those are a couple of the books that I'm planning to read, you know, over the next kind of couple of months, year or so, that I think I'm going to be giving 5 stars. Let me know, as usual, if you've read any of these books. I'm always super curious to hear, you know, where these kind of land for you. Let's take it down to the comments. Otherwise, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.